because I am Gil Scott-Heron's #1 fan. I was his #1 fan. I remained his #1 fan. And I knew all of his music. I knew all of his spoken word. And so I'm from a generation of spoken word that brought us Gil Scott-Heron, The Last Poets, Nikki Giovanni. So we're kind of snobs when it comes to spoken word. No jack leg stuff, right? You gotta come with it. You gotta bring it. You gotta give a vision for what it is we're trying to do. How are we trying to change our world? It's not just entertainment, right? It was always meant to be revolutionary. And so that's the track that I come from. And I thought I would. How many of y'all have heard Gil Scott's whole spoken word piece, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised? I'm so glad to see all those hands up. I'm just going to read to you a little bit of it. It's a really long piece as I was going through it. And it's got a lot of references that were contemporary at the time, but might not mean anything to you at this moment. So I thought I would skip through some of that. But I want to give you this last sort of stanza. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back. After a message about a white tornado, white lightning, or white people, you will not have to worry about a dove in your bedroom, the tiger in your tank, or the giant in your toilet bowl. These are references to products that were commercials on television all the time. The revolution will not go better with Coke. The revolution will not fight germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live. And when I tell you that we really were working towards a revolution, please believe me. Please believe me. So when I was at that age to be listening to Gil Scott, I think The Revolution Will Not Be Televised came out when I was in the 8th grade. And by the time I was in the 8th grade, I was already a Black Pantherette, right? So like the junior crew, much to my mother and father's chagrin. Fortunately, I was too young to join the party. But if I had been old enough, I would for sure have joined the Black Panther Party because they spoke to what I thought we needed to be doing at that moment. So I'll tell you a little bit about all the things that were going on when I was at that impressionable age, when my own personal politics were being formed, when social movement was happening everywhere in every corner of this country, but also around the world. A whole lot was going on when I was in elementary school, coming into junior high, and then in high school. So I'll tell you one important thing about elementary school. I went to this school, Public School 100, in Harlem, in New York, on West 138th and West 139th Street, across the street from where my parents and I lived. And for the longest time, I thought every public school in New York. In fact, I was well into adulthood when I realized that there was something unique going on in my school, and I didn't realize it at the time. I had to be told it by one of my teachers who I encountered later in adulthood. So we had this amazing Black principal, Adele W. Timpson. She was the first Black woman principal in the New York City public school system. A school system whose student body is overwhelmingly Black and brown people, right? So the fact that I started school in 1964, that she was the first Black principal in the system was pretty extraordinary. But we saw her every day. She lived in the neighborhood. We thought everybody had principals that looked like them, right? We didn't know that our school was unique. Come to find out, she had gone around to different schools in New York and handpicked teachers who she thought would be able to treat these young Black children with the respect that they deserved and help grow their minds in a direction that would lead to them realizing their full potential. I didn't know that. I thought every public school in New York had teachers that were loving on them the way our teachers were loving on us. But we didn't have a lot of Black teachers. But my first teacher in kindergarten, Miss Cato, was a Black woman. And she just was all that. She did so many things with us. We were just in kindergarten. But she really was pushing us to be our best selves. And one day around Christmas, another black teacher had asked her if she could send some students down to the art studio to help her work on this project. She picks a group of us, including myself. We go down into the basement of the school, and there is this big studio being run by the art teacher. How many of y'all have ever heard of the artist Faith Randall? She was our art teacher. And she was also a leader in the Black arts movement at the same time that she was our art teacher. So we're getting all of this stuff. We're going to all these art exhibits. She took us once to a demonstration in front of the New York City Metropolitan Museum of Art where all these black artists are parading around, and she put us in the line and we're parading around. I thought everybody was doing that, right? Turns out the Museum of Women in the Arts in DC did a retrospective of her work, I want to say about 10 years ago. I took my aunt, took some girlfriends, their aunts, and in the run-up to the show, she talked through, showed a lot of her work, walked us through sort of her trajectory, her work, how she was thinking about it. But I went up to her and I reintroduced myself. She hadn't seen me since 1970. It had been a minute. And I told her I was her student. I was in her art classes. I took art with her for 5 consecutive years. And I have a strong streak around art and love of art. I collect art. I do art. It's always been a strong facet in my life because I had this extraordinary art teacher when I was in elementary school. And so I'm telling her, you know, how much I loved being in her class. And that's when she started explaining, well, this was Miss Timpson's dream about what the school should be about. And I said, I thought everybody was having that experience. She said, no, only the students at PS 100 were having that experience because we had that principal with that vision. She said she came and got me from a high school that I was teaching at and asked me to come and teach these babies. The reason I'm sharing that with you is to say that if you want to grow a movement for revolution, you have to start with the babies. And Miss Timpson was no revolutionary. She and my father had known each other in Miami when my dad immigrated to Miami from the Bahamas. They lived in the same neighborhood. He had known her for decades. But neither one of them were what I would call revolutionaries. But what she showed me is that revolutionaries come in all shapes and sizes, and they do all kinds of things, right? And they come about transformation from a variety of different perspectives. So that's elementary school. At the same time, in the 3rd grade, another black teacher, Ms. Jones, her niece and I lived in the same housing complex, Irene, who we called Reenie. And one day, Ms. Jones sort of collapsed through the front door of our classroom, and she staggered over to Miss Heiferman, our 3rd grade teacher. And she fell into Miss Heiferman's arms and she said, they killed him. They killed him. It was the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated. And she fell into her arms and they both started crying. About 20 minutes later, the whole school was dismissed. We all went home in the middle of the day. And later that evening, there was a riot in Central Harlem because people were so angry about what had happened. How could you kill the Prince of Peace? And at the same time that that's going on, right, so the civil rights movement is unfolding every night on the news. My dad was an inveterate watcher of the news, and I sat right next to him, and we watched the news together every night. He didn't tell me to go in another room. He didn't say, this is too much for you. I watched it on the news every night. 2 things were on the news every single night. What was happening in the Deep South and the Vietnam War, live on the news every night, right? So, you know, I'm 9 years old, I'm 10 years old, I'm 11 years old. And also, what's happening is that the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is doing throwdown organizing in the Deep South. Students, not only black students, but mostly black students, had come from all over the country to work on voting rights and voter education and housing issues and food security and all of these issues. And these are students, right, between the ages of 18 and 22 years old. One of those students is John Lewis at Tennessee Bible College in Nashville, Tennessee. And he gets the call because there's a movement of students in Nashville to desegregate facilities in Nashville, Tennessee. And they take that movement, and there's movements in North Carolina of students, and movements in Mississippi, and movements in Louisiana, and movements all over. And the students are coming from everywhere to help fight the fight that needs to be fought. So I'm seeing this on television every night. And then there's a whole movement of students who are fighting back against the Vietnam War. And when I say fighting back, I mean doing everything in their power, including burning their draft certificates. So at that time, the military could call you up at any moment. Once you turned 18 years old, any male could be called up at any moment to serve in the United States military. You could not say, no, I'm not going. So when Muhammad Ali said, I'm not going, it was a really, really big thing to be a conscientious objector. Young people were going to Canada so they wouldn't have to fight that war. And it was young people that brought that war to a screeching halt. A screeching halt. Not to mention the people who were over fighting the war itself. But here at home, it was young people who were saying this is not a just war. We should not be feeding the war machine with our bodies, especially our young male black bodies, who were fighting disproportionately in the United States military. Imagine, this is all going on while I'm in school. I'm watching this on the news every night. My dad is a labor organizer, and all the unions are throwing down in the civil rights movement, all of them. And the union he belonged to in New York, American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, District Council 37, was one of the largest unions in the United States. Mostly black public workers, black and brown public workers. And they put everything they had on the line to fight for civil rights. Everything they had on the line. One connection to Detroit. Before Dr. King gave that empowered speech, I Have a Dream, at the March on Washington, he first gave it at a civil rights march here in Detroit. The first time he ever uttered that vision about I Have a Dream, he did it in New York, at a rally and a demonstration organized by Aretha Franklin's father, the Reverend C.L. Franklin, who was a powerful, powerful Baptist minister here in Detroit. People were throwing down, and you sort of had to be under a rock and held down by other rocks to not know what was going on and to not have an opinion about what was going on. Unfortunately for my parents, my opinion was, let me out of here. I've got to go to North Carolina. I've got to go somewhere. I've got to be involved in this. Or, alternatively, you could let me stay here in New York and let me join the Black Panther Party. The first time I said that, I was 9. And I was so deadly serious about what I was saying. So deadly serious about it. I was a serious kid. My mother used to tell me all the time, you need to lighten up. You ain't gonna make it, because everything ain't life and death. And I'm like, how could you say that? Everything is life and death at this moment. Imagine you're having that conversation with a 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old, and oh my God, by the time I got to be 13, I was off the charts, right? So my mom and I moved to Queens. She and my dad separated. My dad stayed in Harlem. My mom and I moved to Queens. Right on the corner, a block away from where I lived, was the Black Panther Party headquarters in South Jamaica, Queens. And I'm like, oh my God, really? Really? And my mother's younger siblings lived with us, who were young adults themselves at the time. We were all taken by the Black Panther Party. And we would go over and visit. We would go and get the newspaper. So the Black Panther Party had a newspaper. And everything you wanted to read was in that newspaper. And I read every word of what was in that newspaper. And we would go and visit the headquarters. And when we would go, they would be doing this free breakfast program, right? Feeding the kids. There were a lot of really, really poor and struggling families in our community. And from that effort that the Black Panther Party did about the free breakfast program came federal programs, right? Free breakfast in schools, supplemental nutrition assistance programs, developed by people who were members of the Black Panther Party, but who also had a public health background. And we're trying to figure out, what do we do for our people? The reason that I'm telling you all of this is that the reason that I do environmental justice work, the reason that I do this work, the reason that I have stayed in this work for 40 years is because it was the only way I could figure out, how can I continue the work that people before me did? How can there be a connective tissue about what they were trying to do to save our communities, to save us, to build a world that was not so grounded in racism? I was so very clear about that when I was a child. Why? Because you saw it on television all the time. So my mom and I moved from Queens and we moved to the Bronx. Okay, we had a nomadic period. It went from the time I was 11 until the time I was 15. And we moved around a lot of places. But in each one of the places that we lived, there was something profound happening. So we lived in the West Bronx. The West Bronx, how many people know anything about New York here? So the West Bronx is that part of the Bronx that's adjacent to where Yankee Stadium is, right? The South Bronx, or the East Bronx, is across town going east. So I'm living in the West Bronx, walking distance from Yankee Stadium, but for some reason, the middle school that I got sent to, or the neighborhood school, was in the South Bronx. So I had to take a bus to go to school every day. And I swear to you, what I'm about to say is the gospel truth. First day I'm in this school, March 15th, 1972, the Ides of March. Get off the bus, go to the school. I see all these people running around like they ain't got no damn sense. I'm from a very disciplined West Indian family. No running around, no screaming, no hollering, no falling out on the floor, no acting out, none of that. We don't do that in our house. But everybody's kind of running kind of crazy. So I'm looking like, what's wrong with these people, right? Get assigned to my classes and we go out to lunch. And at the lunch period, there's a gang war between the Black Pearls and the Black Saigons. And they have bazookas and they are in our playground, which was just a concrete lot. And they are about to have a war. And I'm like, I'm going to die today. My first day at this school, I'm going to die here. And I get home that night and I try to explain it to my mother, and she's like, this didn't happen. I'm like, I'm telling you, this actually happened today. But while I was at that school, the school district, which was one of the most underperforming school districts in the city of New York, had a program called Upward Bound. And the vice principal who interviewed me, Dr. Thomas, immediately saw in me that very first day at school, you need to be in this program. And so this program had kids going to school on Saturdays, all day Saturdays. You went to this enrichment program, and you went up to the school in a neighborhood called the Riverdale section of the Bronx, which I only understood Riverdale to be someplace in the Archie comics, right? The town that they lived in was called Riverdale. But this place was manicured lawns, mansions, people with servants, just extraordinary things going on. And I'm coming from the West Bronx and the South Bronx. And so every day when I take 2 buses and a train to get to that school that I would get a scholarship to go to, I'm traveling through all kinds of socioeconomic differences that are profound in the city. How much time? 15. That are profound. And I'm noticing that our neighborhood in the South Bronx, where our school was, is in really wretched condition. Our neighborhood in the West Bronx is just a half a step better than that. And then as I traveled through all these other communities, getting to the Riverdale section of the Bronx, it's like you're going from one planet to another. And that's when the seeds got planted in me that would eventually become me becoming an urban planner. Wow. Because I noticed that my dad used to like to walk. Long walks all over the city of New York. And the reason that he did that is because he wanted me to know and understand the place that I lived. I want you to know what this city is about. I want you to know what these communities are about. I want you to know where people live. He was showing me segregation, right? But not explaining it to me, he wanted me to see it. And my mother had this vision, or not vision, this lesson. No matter where you are, they can drop you from a helicopter blindfolded. You always got to know how to get home, right? You always got to know how to get home. So I have a really good sense of direction, and I know my city. But I know that where the white folks live is profoundly different than where the black people live, and then where the Puerto Rican people live. And all the Chinese people live in one neighborhood called Chinatown, right? And that just really stayed in my head and resonated in my head. So I get to college. I go to Fieldston. I applied to Barnard College, Columbia University, which is in Harlem. How many people know that? That the university is smack in the middle of Harlem, 116th Street. And it is a hostile encampment in the middle of a community of 250,000 black and brown people. Every day is a different way of expressing how much we fear those people and how much we don't want our students to have any interaction with them. So from day one, it's a really difficult situation. Classes are great, met some of the most wonderful people, some of whom are still some of my closest friends on the earth. But the institution really taught me something about how you can have big institutions adjacent to struggling communities of color that have absolutely no relationship and or are a part of the oppression of those communities. So, I joined the battle from day one. I'm not happy with this, and I'm going to say that I'm not happy with this. We get involved in the anti-apartheid movement. Our university never did disinvest, but I'm out there in that. And I'll say one thing about that, the reason that I mention it to you. When things jumped off on campus at Columbia last year, when the students were mobilizing and doing the encampment against the war in Gaza, the university called out the NYPD. In a million freaking years, no matter what we did. Now, granted, they took it a few steps further than we did in the anti-apartheid movement, but it would never have occurred to Columbia University, even though we had a semi-Nazi president at the time. No NYPD would step on our campus, and they certainly wouldn't be allowed to go into any buildings and to extricate students and to arrest students. Something profound had changed. Something profound had changed, and I was so glad to see the students out there. And then graduation rolled around, and the students came back and they wouldn't move, so they had to move graduation. I was like, oh, they have taken this to another level. I'm telling you all of this to say that there are always a lot of things that are happening in our world, in our lives, in our circumstances, in our neighborhoods. And the question is, how do we receive the information? How do we respond to that information? How does it inform what we go on to do in our lives? So after I graduated from Columbia, along the way, while I was at school, I was also involved in a campaign, a national campaign to free these political prisoners called the Wilmington 10. How many people have ever heard of the Wilmington 10? So the Wilmington 10 were a group of organizers led by ministers from the United Church of Christ, Commission for Racial Justice. The United Church of Christ is the denomination that I belong to, a really small Protestant denomination. And they had sent a group of folks down to Wilmington, North Carolina to register black folks to vote. So Wilmington has a really racist history as a city. One of the biggest, longest, most destructive race riots to ever happen in the United States happened in Wilmington, North Carolina. And from then until pretty much now, the segregation is profound. And the oppression of black people is really profound. Now, if you see Wilmington, Wilmington is a really beautiful city, right on the Atlantic Ocean. But the black people live in one place and the white people live in another, and never do the twain meet, even in 2025. So in the late 70s, early 80s, they sent this crew of people down to organize people to vote, and they were being quite successful. So the North Carolina state troopers and the Wilmington police arrested these organizers and charged them with fomenting a riot, convicted them, and sent them to prison. They were in prison for 5 years, and then they were exonerated. While they were in prison, one of the leaders of the movement, Ben Chavis, 10 minutes left. Ben Chavis, who was a minister at the United Church of Christ, got his Master of Divinity at Duke University while he was in prison. I'm still trying to figure out how he did that. And then when he got out, he started another organization called the National Black Independent Political Party. And then he came to New York to finish his PhD at Union Theological Seminary. And Union Theological Seminary is a very progressive Protestant Baptist seminary directly across the street from my college. It's on the other side of the street. So a classmate of mine who was a year ahead of me, she called and she said, Vernice, Ben is coming to Union. I said, ain't no way Ben Chavis is coming up here. She said, yes, he is. I said, no, he's not. She said, yes, he is. So from the time she told me that, I started walking from my apartment to campus, which was about 4 blocks, every single day. I'm scouring the streets looking for Ben Chavis. Like I'm looking for, I don't know, some rare coin. I'm scouring the streets looking for Ben Chavis. About 4 months into that, sure enough, I ran into him on the corner of the street that I lived on. He lived on the same street, 1 block up. And we stood there in the freezing January weather talking about everything. My impression of my fellow black students at Columbia University was that none of them were down for the revolution, or very few of them were down for the revolution. When you came to Columbia, you came to go to medical school, to law school, to engineering school, to be an architect, blah, 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 right? But you didn't come to do social justice work. That's not why you were there, which made me insane. I'm like, y'all see what's happening in Harlem? Y'all see what's happening around the world? You see what's happening in South Africa? How could you only be thinking about going to graduate school? So I said to Ben when I ran into him on the street that day, I need you to come and talk to the Black Students Organization because they need to be shook, like by the shoulders, like what the hell, right? So I get him to come, he does. And I stay in touch with him. I stay in touch with him, and for 3 years, I call him every 6 months to say, you need to hire me at the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice because I am the future of the civil rights movement and y'all are getting old. Right? Now looking at y'all, if we would have had that conversation now, I was like, really? Really, really? I think about the hubris of me saying that to him. So one day I call him and Ben says, 3 years now, he says, well, we're getting ready to start this project on toxic injustice. And I don't know if you would be interested, but why don't you come and meet our research director, Charles Lee? And if the two of you hit it off, maybe you can come and help us do this research. I did not know what toxic and injustice had to do with each other, why they would be in the same sentence, why they would be modifying each other. I had no idea, but I knew I wanted to do civil rights work. And if this was going to be my way in, then that's what I was going to do. So I go, I meet Charles. I assume before I meet Charles that Charles is black because clearly everybody who works on civil rights is black, right? Charles is Chinese American. Hopefully you will encounter him because he is truly, in my humble opinion, because I was sitting right next to him in an office adjacent to him, he is the father of the environmental justice movement. Now, we got a lot of mothers, we got a lot of soldiers, we got a lot of people that did a lot of things, but Charles was the person who thought strategically about how we do this work, what we do. So they were working already in Warren County, North Carolina, because local United Church of Christ churches in North Carolina were fighting a battle with the state of North Carolina to keep them from siting a hazardous waste landfill in their midst. And people were throwing down in Warren County. We look upon Warren County as the touchstone of the environmental justice movement because it was where people really first organized in a sustained way to fight against an environmental and racial threat that was happening at the same time. And Charles had this idea after them doing about a year's worth of work in United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. At the time, the UCC was headquartered in New York City. Now it's headquartered in Cleveland. And Charles had this idea that there's something really happening here in Warren County. But we need to figure out whether it's unique to Warren County, it's unique to rural North Carolina. Is this a phenomenon in the Southeast region? Does it have broader implications? And so what he shared with me, this research project, was to look at three things and see if there was a correlation. The location of all hazardous waste sites in the United States. US EPA keeps, at least they used to keep, we don't know what they're going to keep henceforth, but they used to keep and have something called the National Priorities List, the NPL. And the NPL is a list of all the known hazardous waste sites in the United States. And these are hazardous waste sites that are called also Superfund sites, sites that pose imminent threat to human health and the environment. So you got to do something about them. They put them on the NPL, they do something called hazardous ranking, and they determine which ones are imminently threatening. And they got to send people out to do cleanup of those sites, right? So we had this list. And then we wanted to correlate what's the residential zip code in which those sites were located. And then what is the racial composition of the zip codes in which those sites were located. It was my job to aggregate all that data before the advent of geographic information systems. Can you imagine? Can you think about doing this without GIS? At the time, the only entity that had access to GIS was the Department of Defense. And it was not publicly available. There were no databases, there was no Esri, there was none of that. So Vernice had a map of the United States that was covered a 6-foot table, broken down by county. And I took that data from EPA and I colored in a certain color for where the sites were. And then I colored in another color if it was 40% or greater people of color population. And then I broke it out by zip code. And then I had a map. How long do you think it took me to develop that map?
6 months.
Hello?
6 months.
6 months. That's exactly how long it took me. 6 months. How long would it take you now to run a map like that of any geographic location? How long would it take you? 1 hour. An hour if you don't know what you're doing. 6 minutes if you know how to manipulate GIS. That's correct, right? So this thing has taken me 6 months to put together. And as I'm putting it together, and I'm seeing how things are stacking up, right? So it could be the most isolated indigenous community, way the hell out in Minnesota somewhere, or Nebraska, or Iowa, right? But there are these sites. There aren't that many people of color. They're all in this particular area, these adjacent zip codes, and there are the hazardous waste sites, right? And it just kept running like that all over the country, everywhere I was finding it. So we had an independent data firm, Public Data Access, also running the data that I was coming up with, because we wanted to make sure that the data that we produced was going to withstand the withering criticism that we knew was going to come forward, right? So Public Data Access is running data sets, looking at a bunch of different variables. Race being one of them, level of educational attainment, home ownership, size of family, graduate from high school, college, whatever. We're running all kinds of things, about 160 different variables, race being one of them. And race proved to be the most statistically significant indicator in where these hazardous waste sites were located. And we were off and running, right? Now, was that our hypothesis from day one? Yes, it was. But what was scary about it was the degree of statistical significance. And statistics was the one class in college I came dangerously close to failing, dangerously close, right? But I remembered one really salient principle of statistics. If you see a pattern repeat itself again and again and again, what you can infer from that is that this is not random. It's intentional, right? And so from that, we extrapolated, and Ben said at the press conference, Ben Chavis became the Deputy Executive Director and then the Executive Director of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. And Ben said at the press conference in April of 1987, where we released the report, what we have uncovered here in Warren County, North Carolina, is just one example of environmental racism. But you don't see, if you look at their report, you don't see environmental racism stated in the report. It was what Ben said at the press conference in response to a question that a reporter asked him. And that became a sort of traumatizing phraseology for EPA. Because what do we know about racism? We know that racism is not random, right? We know that there's some intentionality here around where these sites are located. And then we went on to do more research to find out that sites that are located in white communities get cleaned up faster than sites that are in communities of color, get more thorough kinds of cleanup, so you really remediate the hazard. Whereas in black communities, they might lift up 6 inches of soil, put some clean soil on top of it, call it a day, right? So we uncovered all of this. How old was Vernice when Vernice did this work? Vernice was 26 years old. And it changed the course of my life. So I believe this, and I hope you believe it too. Sometimes, if you're really lucky, and you really prepare yourselves, and you really get clear about this is where I think I want to do, sometimes the universe will answer you and will say, this is your work. This is what it said to me. This was my work. This is what I was meant to do. This is how I was meant to do it. It came to me. It was delivered to me. Was put on a table and said, you do this research, it's going to change your life. And sure enough, that's what happened. The same time that I'm doing this research, some friends of mine that I had worked on the Jesse Jackson presidential campaign with in New York said, you know, there are these people in your neighborhood that are building this independent Democratic Party organization, and you should check them out. And I'm like, Democratic Party politics in New York? I don't think so, right? I don't think I want no parts of that. But eventually I went. I'm still doing this research. I go to this meeting one night in my neighborhood, and I meet Peggy Shepard and Chuck Sutton, who had founded this organization. And they were talking about the North River Sewage Treatment Plant and how they were trying to lead a battle against the city of New York and EPA and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation to keep them from opening this mammoth 10-story, 10-block long, 8-story facility to treat 180 million gallons of raw sewage and wastewater every day in our community, on the edge of our community along the Hudson River. And I'm like, oh my God. What? It's in my neighborhood. It wasn't a hazardous waste site, but it didn't take any time for me to figure out that the very work that I was going downtown to do was happening in my own neighborhood. How could I not know that this was going on? And I joined that organization that night, West Harlem Independent Democrats, which then 2 years later became West Harlem Environmental Action. That was 37 years ago, and we're still throwing down and we're still in the fight. I hope it happens for you the way it happened for me. But the one thing that I know that I did that I want you all to do is to be prepared. So we're in this moment, right? We're in this moment where people are trying to deny our existence, deny our history, deny our reality, deny the data and the science. So that's one thing I love about the EJ movement and the climate movement. We believe in data, do we? Yeah. We believe in doing the research, do we? We believe in teaching and training people on how to mesh social science and bench science, right? Because that's what our movement has always been about. We believe in being prepared for this moment. Are you ready for what's happening now?
Yeah.
So for a minute there, we were stunned at what was happening. Are we still stunned? I had a great dinner last night, and my friend Sarita Turner, who was here, said, we've been here before, and we can't keep going back to the place where we're stunned and we're like, oh my God, I don't know how we got here. You know how we got here. We've been here. We just, every now and again, we divert a little from the main mission of white supremacy, right? But the mission is white supremacy. And what we're doing is fighting back against white supremacy in every way that we know how. You have to be prepared, right? You have to do your research. And let me say this is going to be a really ageist comment. Google is not research. Google is Google. Okay? You actually got to go into a library. I'm sorry, yes you do. Right? You actually got to go in to where the data is. You got to create some of the data yourself. I created data. I created a database that never existed before. And then when I finished doing that report, Toxic Waste and Race, I called libraries across the country to get them to take a copy of our report and put it in their systems, so that people would have some place to go to see that what is happening to them is not fiction, right? And that's the point of the data, to validate the lived experience of our people in our communities. That is the point of the data. Last thing before I go. I was having a conversation with my grandmother while I was doing this research. My grandmother was a nurse, all of her sisters were nurses, my mother was a nurse. And so I said to my grandmother one day, Grandma, you wouldn't believe what I'm finding in this data. So I explained to her what the data says. And her first question was, how much money did you spend on this study? I said, I don't know, Grandma, I'm not in charge of the money. $150,000, $250,000. And she said, whoo, I'm so glad I don't belong to the United Church of Christ. I was like, well, how would you say such a thing like that? That's my church. She said, because y'all spent $250,000 of people's hard-earned money, which I'm assuming the national church got from the local churches from contributions, donations to the church. I said, that's true. She said, so y'all spent $250,000 of people's hard-earned money to tell you something that every black person in America knows to be true. And she completely deflated my sales. I was like, oh, okay. She's 100% right about that. And then I thought about it for a minute. I said, well, Grandma, you're a scientist, and this is what you know to be true. You can have all the lived experience in the world, but until you have some peer-reviewed studies that can replicate those conditions that black folks are living in, and that brown folks are living in, and that indigenous people are living in, and that poor people are living in, and that immigrants are living in, until you can replicate that data again and again and again and come out with the same results, no matter where you're touching down, it's like it didn't happen. And that's what had been happening to black people for millennia. We knew we were living in poisonous circumstances. We knew the water wasn't safe to drink. We knew we lived in dangerous housing. We knew we lived too close to industry and too close to transportation corridors. You know a little bit about that, don't you? In Richmond, Queen. Took out a whole black community to build I-95, a thriving black community. Happened here in Detroit with a highway, right? We knew all of this. It was part of our lived experience. But because it was so much of our lived experience, we began to internalize that this is how we're supposed to live. This is how it's supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be living in Riverdale, New York, in the Bronx. I'm supposed to be living in West Harlem and going in the West Bronx and going to school in the South Bronx, which was being burnt down to the ground, literally, while I was in middle school. We have internalized the worst of the worst because that's how we have always lived. Our job is to change those material conditions, to lift up our people, to give them not false hope, but real hope about what could be different, what will be different. And we are the ones, you are the ones, that have been called upon to do that work. Thank you so much.
Hello? Whoa, okay, that works. All right, let's give it up again for Miss Vernice. Thank you so much. Powerful words, amazing. That's incredible. That's incredible. So this is some time now for folks to share your experiences, ask some questions, get some, advice, feedback, all that good stuff. We're gonna have Radia and TC running mics. So feel free to think about what you want to ask, share with the group. And we have Miss Vernice here to share some insights as well, all right?
Good morning. My name is Justina Thompson. I've been doing environmental justice work for quite some time, but I just started my MPH at Johns Hopkins, and I'm finding that I'm very excited by health policy. I'm trying to make the most of my time there. I'm wondering what kind of research or volunteer experiences you think might be valuable for me to take advantage of, specifically at the intersection of public health and environmental justice. And thank you for all that you've already shared.
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. So proud of you being at Johns Hopkins, going with your best. So there's a program at Johns Hopkins called CHARM, I think. That's a great entity to be in. They're connecting public health, medical research, on the ground reality, trying to figure out what kinds of public health interventions could really help lift people up and change the trajectory, the health trajectory that so many folks, so many Black folks in Baltimore City are experiencing, and elsewhere, but this is really about Baltimore City. I would really point you in that direction. Obviously, health disparities is a really big issue. Baltimore has I think it's true in many cities, but in Baltimore it's particularly stark. There is a 22-year health disparity in Baltimore City between some Black zip codes and predominantly white zip codes. And I'll tell you how segregated Baltimore is. My family is from Ellicott City in Baltimore. My mother was born in Baltimore, and I still have lots of family in Baltimore. And every summer or holidays, I would come down and visit them. Spend lots of time with them, walk in the streets with my cousin Tony. Tony and I are the same age. And I was 46 before I realized that white people lived in Baltimore, which is kind of crazy, right? I was going to see an extraordinary environmental justice leader, Donald Smith, who at the time was battling cancer and being treated at Johns Hopkins. And he called me one day and asked me if I could bring him, he was a devoted vegetarian, if I could bring him some organic fruit. I was in New York. I said, sure, I'll bring it to you. Called the hospital, asked what exit I should get off 95, and they told me the wrong exit. It was one exit before. And I get off the exit, my husband and I, and I'm in this community with tree-lined, oak-lined streets and beautiful stores and shopping, and people are walking up and down, and they're just happy and smiling. It's like a commercial, right? I asked this guy, I clearly have gotten off at the wrong exit. He said, oh yeah, you just need to go one more exit. I could barely contain myself because I literally didn't know that there were white communities in Baltimore, because my whole life's experience up to that time was just going to see family, see friends, whatever, but everybody was Black. There were no white people. Baltimore is still a heavily segregated city. In fact, everything we know about residential segregation comes from Baltimore. They were the first city to figure out how to legally do residential segregation, and then it took off around the country. But that health disparity issue is still very, very real and very present. And if there's a way to be a part of some of the work that people are doing around that, and there's also another program in the history department called Hard Histories. The woman who leads that, her last name is Jones. And they are looking at the history of Johns Hopkins as a slaveholder, right? And how the university actually did a lot of medical experimentation on Black people. And bringing that information to the fore. And I think that's important because as medical and public health professionals, there's still a lot to be uncovered about the unequal treatment of people of color versus white folks in the medical system, and what is the reason that we still have those huge gaps in life expectancy? A lot of it is environmental, right? So in order to treat the whole self, you have to treat the environment as well. So but I can't think of a better institution for you to be at. I'm really proud of you.
Hello. Over here in the corner getting some sunlight.
I'm sorry.
No problem. My name is Malik Middleton. I came from Richmond, Virginia, and I definitely wanted to tag on to the aspect of if you want to be revolutionary, start with the youth. I'm an urban farmer, so that's sort of my perspective of doing environmental work in particular. But Richmond itself was heavily redlined. I think we were among some of the first to put out the map. And when Jackson Moore was destroyed, they created a bunch of public housing units all across the city, and communities moved and migrated to those. So I do a lot of work within public housing units, educating our youth on how to grow their own fruits and vegetables. But I'm also a biologist, so for them to also interact with somebody that looks like them, has tattoos and things like that, and like breaks that mold, other than just like basketball, football, or music, it's really amazing because not only are they able to sort of like take the steps of improving their own health and everything like that subconsciously, but they're also able to beautify their neighborhoods through the flowers and everything as well. So I wanted to know a little bit more about the importance of working with youth and how to also approach youth with compassion and kindness while also like not being discouraged in the sense that like for me, I'm like, these kids are young and I'm like, why don't they have like everything that they need to like right now, and how can I get them as much as they can without becoming like too burnt out? Because for me, in Richmond, it's hard to work with the older generations because I don't want to say like they're too far to be helped per se. But like you said, starting off with the youth is like the easiest way for me conceptually to start a revolution, just automatically having them grow their own food, beautifying the neighborhoods and so forth, because then they're also able to become aware of their environment. When we go to the fan district and they go back to their neighborhoods, they're able to communicate some of the things that they see, like why are there more trees and stuff like that. And for me, I don't ever like to tell people what to think. I like to just show them so that they create their own conclusions. So I wanted to learn a little bit more about sort of that work, especially working with youth.
So, since you do urban farming, which I think is just an exceptional way to show up as a biologist, I just can't think of a better way to teach science, right? Helping young folks develop a love of science and of math is really important, right? And it might be helpful to help young people understand that as a people, we created math and we created science. Right? Didn't come from Greece, right? Certainly didn't come from Great Britain. It came from Egypt, right? And it came from Assyria, and it came from Ethiopia. And I think instilling in young people a sense of you are carrying on a tradition is a really important thing. And then as it relates to the old heads, I would just say a lot of us who live in urban areas come from rural backgrounds, right? We grew up farming. Well, I didn't, but our elders did. Some of our elders. My mother grew up on a farm in Ellicott City. And the whole time she lived in New York, which was most of her life, she grew these amazing plants. But what I think she was really trying to say is that she really wanted to get back to the land. But there was no way for her to do that, right? So helping young people make that connection and bringing back some of the folks maybe who have that history, who could do that work, and probably who themselves are looking for that kind of creative expression, might be a really good sort of intergenerational thing to do. But I think helping the young folks to understand science through doing. I used to work with somebody who said, people learn best by doing, right? So you could tell me all day long. When I get to do it myself is when I really get the lesson. Right, when I really figure out how it works. So I would think about that. And then I would think about maybe meeting up with some of the other folks. I know in Maryland, we have a collection of folks who are doing urban farming. We have Black urban farmers who are really coming into their own. I think it would be helpful to connect with those folks because y'all are onto something about how to heal the land, how to restore ourselves, and how to feed ourselves. In a minute, and this just has to be said because it's just so real. I don't know why people don't understand it. When they get finished trying to deport all the immigrant populations, in a minute, we're going to be in a food crisis, right? Ain't going to be nobody to grow the food. Ain't going to be nobody to tend the food. Ain't going to be nobody to get the food out of the ground, process it, get it to market, right? And one of my favorite tidbits is just to know how deep this moment is that we're in. When the current president, during the campaign last year, was speaking to the National Association of Black Journalists, that really highly contested exchange he had with all those black reporters. One of the statements he made was, you all should be against these illegal immigrants because they're taking your jobs. I don't know if y'all heard that. I heard it clearly. I'm like, they ain't taking my damn job because I ain't gonna be out there growing no food. I will starve before I will be out there doing that hard back-breaking labor that they do, right? So we're headed into a food crisis. First, it's gonna be really, really expensive, and then it's gonna be really, really scarce. And so the way that we prepare for that is to grow our own food, right? To have cooperatives, to do farm to household. We need to be putting those pieces in place now because we are sure, as I'm standing here, headed towards a food crisis. Is that helpful? Okay.
Hello? Okay. Hi, I'm Deanna. I'm from Flint, Michigan, so I'll be away from here. Thank you for getting snaps.
Hi, Deanna.
Yes. And I work for an organization called Young Youth to Be Green, and I mentor youth in Flint and in Memphis. And we're working on a youth council in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore as well. And I just wanted to know what advice do you have for youth as I mentor youth. And the environmental justice movement is very intergenerational, and as our elders of the movement, you guys are aging out. And I know you guys want to pass the baton, so what are...
Who told you we wanted to pass the baton? No, that's logical, but who said we wanted to do it?
A couple of the elders I've been talking to, I know they want to pass the baton. So what are some words of advice you would give to our mentor? Because a lot of them, they're like beginning college or younger, like middle school and high school.
I would say that the younger folks, and I include all of you, most everybody in this room in this, are bringing a skill set that a lot of us do not have, right? And we need to combine the technology that you understand so viscerally and you manipulate and do it so well, the way that you aggregate data, the way that you produce information, the way that you do social media. We need to really figure out how to blend that with the organizing science that we do, the data and analysis that we do. Granted, it's old school, but my study has stood forever, right? Nobody can contest what it says. Race is the most statistically significant indicator of where these hazardous waste sites are located. We put that out in 1987. Many have tried, but no one has been able to impeach it, right? But there's got to be a way to connect the way that you all collect data, analyze data, put it out in social media. The power of social media can be for real evil, we see, right? Or it can be for real elevation. And I think we got to focus on how do we use it as a tool for elevation, information, and education. Now, granted, there's a whole bunch of people out there trying to do evil in the social media space, and they are winning, right? We have got to get in that battle and fight back. And young people really like that space. So how do we infuse that space with knowledge, with information, and with transformation as our goal, right? Not just entertainment. We have lots of entertainers. As my dad used to say, when I was going to high school, I had the choice to go to two schools, music and art in New York and or Fieldston, the private school that I went to. I was going to music and art because music and art were the things that I was most passionate about. And my dad said, and granted my father was born in 1909, so just take that into consideration when you hear what he said to me. We got enough colored singers and dancers and entertainers. What we don't have is enough scholars. You are going to that school, right? I thought it was a little harsh, but there's got to be a way to be able to do both things, right? There's got to be a way to do what Gil Scott-Heron did. right? To do what Nikki Giovanni did. There's got to be a way to infuse and to connect that data, that science, and information, and education. Young people seem to absorb it better when they don't have to sit there and study rote the way many of us did, right? But I also see their level of information access is a lot higher at a lot younger ages. How do we tap into that for good? So I would say working on that space is a really good thing to do, to help young people use the things that they're passionate about, to gain knowledge, and then to figure out how to apply that knowledge in some other ways. But again, Google ain't research, social media ain't organizing, right? But you can connect it as a bridge to help people figure out where to go and where to be, and how to be of service. Is that helpful? Okay.
All right. So, just to put some organization a little bit into the madness.
Who's talking?
I'm over here. Hey.
Thank you.
We are going to go to table 1. We have 3 people from table 8, and then I'll update y'all on what we go from there.
Morning. My name is Jennifer. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. And I believe you said you're Bahamian, right?
Say that again?
Your father is Bahamian from
Yes.
the Bahamas. So my father is also from the Bahamas. My mother's from Guyana.
So you know what I'm talking about?
I do. And I honestly felt like a lot of overlap when you were talking about your experience in New York. When my family immigrated here, my grandmother brought all of my mother and her siblings up to the Bronx, and they lived in the Bronx, 141st Street. And so, like, the experience with the school system, my grandmother was a teacher in the school system. Just a lot of overlap. But that is not the point. My question is, with your Caribbean cultural background and proximity to that global South culture, how does that show up and or influence your work, especially being based in New York, where we wouldn't typically think of that as a part of the global South, but there are so many people there that hail from the global South.
Yes.
And when we think about the similarities that waterways bring with problems, I think about that with the Bahamas. I do a lot of work with the Gullah Geechee community off of Sapelo Island in Georgia, and I also do a lot of work with farmers in Cuba, and I just think about water. And yeah, just how does that show up in your work? How do you allow that to influence, if it does?
Well, it definitely does. It terrifies me. So, when I moved from New York to Maryland, I lived just east of DC. When my late husband and I went to look at the house that we bought, that I live in, I was standing in the driveway, and I said to him, I want to buy this house, but I hadn't gone inside. And he said, how can you make a decision about buying a house without going inside? I said, you see this front yard? This is more grass than I ever had access to growing up. And then there's another one on the side, and the one in the back is 3 times as large. Now, I'm sure what he was saying is, this girl ain't gonna cut not one blade of grass, right? She ain't gonna do nothing to maintain all of this beautiful greenness that she likes, and that was a fact, and I still don't. But I have people that come and do that, but he used to do it, right? And the reason that after he died in 2017, many friends asked me if I was gonna downsize and move into DC. I said, well, first of all, I moved here from New York. I am not going back to live in an apartment. That ain't never happening again for me. Because I did that my whole life until I moved here when I was 40 years old. But the main reason that I hold on to that house is because at some point, I'm absolutely certain that my family is going to need to come here to get away from the climate disaster that is surely headed their way, right? So I took my Aunt Evelyn, my mother's sister, this is my father's family who lives in, and still live in the Bahamas, most of them. My family is hundreds of people. You could ask anybody in Nassau if they know the Millers, and surely somebody will know somebody in my family. There were 14 of them, brothers and sisters. And I spent every summer of my life growing up with them. So in 2019, I took my Aunt Evelyn, who was my mother's sister, to Nassau to visit my family. And she had the time of her life. They all loved her. We came home on a Sunday. And following Friday, Hurricane Dorian, Category 5 hurricane came through, and you know how it tore. And it was just, I knew it intellectually, that, it's an island. It's an archipelago. It's 800 islands, right? And eventually, they are going to be underwater. But nothing brought it home to me so seriously as Hurricane Dorian. And so my cousin Sherry, her son lived on, Harbor Island? And for 8 weeks, she didn't hear from him. But she knew that boy was alive. She said, if my son was dead, I would know it. And sure enough, one day he called her. And he said, Mama, we're making our way to the port. We're going to get on a ship. We're coming to Nassau. But one of the things he told her is that as they were trekking through the wreckage of what Harbor Island was, they must have seen 200 dead people. Most of whom were Haitian immigrants who had come to Harbor Island to work, right? Our people in the diaspora, particularly in the Caribbean, are up against it. And so this issue around climate change and climate disaster is so real and so palpable. And so I'm holding on to that house. It's just me in this big ass house, right? Because I know my family is going to have to come at some point, and I want them to have some place to come to. There's 11 of them left, but at my uncle's funeral, their father, my husband and I went down. My husband was one of 8. But my immediate family is like 15 people. They can all fit in my dining room. And so my husband had the vision that I had a small family. And I said, I do not have a small family. Just the ones in Maryland are few. But the ones in Nassau are many. Go to my uncle's funeral, there's 2,500 people at the funeral. And my husband's head is like on a rotator. And he's like, are all these people your family? And my cousin who's sitting next to me says, no, only half of them are our family. The other half are the people from the building trades, because my uncle was the first licensed black contractor in the Bahamas, and he built the black construction trades with his own hands and made everybody get their own businesses and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of people that I think about every day. And so, I don't know, about before Dorian, my same cousin Sherry called me one day and she said, the family has asked me to give you a message. I said, what is the message? She said, either you got to stop watching CNN and the Weather Channel, or you got to stop calling us. Because every time there's a hurricane that goes anywhere near them, I'm on the phone all the time, because I'm figuring their power's going down. They don't know what's happening, so I need to tell them. They said, so you know the concept of ground zero, when you're like here where the storm is? We know what's happening. You're watching it on television, we know what's happening. So I'm fearful. Throughout the whole hurricane season, I'm fearful all the time. And I pray. I don't pray for other people to be in harm's way, but I pray for us not to be in harm's way. And that's why climate change is so important to me, because my people live on an island, right? My ancestors are buried in a cemetery on an island, right? My dad's roots are in that place. He was born there. We also have family in Haiti that we've lost contact with. We have family in Cuba that we've lost contact with. You know the triangle, that's the triangle. These people are up against it. And we need policy that talks about small island states. We need policy that talks about loss and damages. We need policy that talks about our contribution to their degradation. And we need more people here in the United States who are working on climate issues to be working on issues in the Caribbean at the same time, right? So for me, it's palpable. It's palpable. And I wish I could go through a hurricane season and not be as freaked out as I am all the time, but I am, right? And it's because my people are there. And it's the same way I feel about my people in Louisiana. Some of you probably know Dr. Beverly Wright. When Hurricane Katrina came through, I was a wreck. So I'm one of those people that watches the Weather Channel on a regular, right? I can watch it for an hour at a time. My husband used to say, how can anybody watch the Weather Channel like that? I said, when you have people who are in places that are threatened by the climate, you watch the Weather Channel, right? He said, yeah, that's not normal. So I am freaked out trying to get in touch with Beverly. And I can't get her. So weeks go by. Finally, I hear from her. And this is what Beverly said. She was on vacation in Florida. She said, if I had known the storm was going to be that bad, I at least would have taken my jewelry and my art with me. right? Meaning she would have gotten out of Dodge, but she had no idea that was going to happen. I went to the supermarket. It was Labor Day weekend when Hurricane Katrina came through. We pulled up in the supermarket and every space was taken. It was Labor Day weekend. People get ready for the barbecue. And I stood in the middle of the parking lot and I screamed at the top of my lungs, "What the hell is wrong with you people? Don't you know that people are dying and are in a flood?" And my husband said, "They don't know those people like you know those people. So does it have to be personal for us to care about what's happening to our people?" That just can't be the only thing that motivates us to be paying attention, but also doing what we can do, right? So what I can do is hold on to my house for the moment that my family has to decamp out of Nassau and they can come someplace and put their heads down and be safe.
Hi, Ms. Vernice. Thank you so much for taking your time to come speak to us. My name is Destiny Hodges. It's good to see you.
Destiny!
This is one of those COVID, post-COVID moments where like you see somebody virtually all the time. But you don't see them in person. Hey. Wasn't you remember who I am? Never mind. But my question was, in a time where so many organizations are collapsing for multiple reasons, right? The funding landscape is a mess. I heard we got some funders here. But the funding landscape is a mess. Also, organizations have had like internal conflict for years that hasn't been resolved, and now that's just leading to an organization's demise. I'm curious, in your experience, as someone who maybe isn't ready to pass the torch, but as someone who is more seasoned in the work, what is the importance in your experience with conflict transformation and restorative?
Conflict transformation?
Right, or restorative justice. And by that, what I mean, for clarity, is the process by which of sometimes resolving issues between people, or at least coming to a point of agreement about what the thing is and how we move forward. That might be mending the friendship, that might be ending the relationship, but at least you like got clarity on the moment, you're clear to move on. So what is your experience with that, especially with your age mates, but also with intergenerational conflict, and how do you see that shaping the movement as we go forward, especially in a time like now?
I love that question, Destiny. So, being a New Yorker, it is part of my DNA. It's actually written on my birth certificate that I don't take no stuff. And I don't have no patience for people who are not come at me straight, right? I prefer that, whatever it is. And I try to create an environment, no matter who I'm working with or where I am, whatever the issue is. If I've done something that rubs you the wrong way, tell me about it, right? Let's have a conversation about it. Because I may be unaware. I try really hard to live my life where I don't inflict pain on other people. Except when you come for me, or my people, then all bets are off, right? But if it's disagreement, lack of ability to talk to each other, lack of ability to have the space to process whatever might be getting in the way, we can take care of that, right? We can take care of that. And I find one of the best ways to deal with it, my mother used to do this, and I believe it to be true, and it's part of my DNA. Why don't you come and have a meal with me? Let me cook for you, right? Because the best way I can show you that at the foundation, I care about you as a person, is to make a meal for you, right? And my mother was like that. She believed that you could resolve a whole lot of things. It's hard for people to stay mad at each other when y'all are eating. And it's especially hard if you have made the food, right? If the food is good. Now, if the food is not good, that's a whole different conversation. We invite people to your house if you can't cook. Or you could always bring food in from someplace else, right? If you can't cook, you ain't got to poison people, right? But that communal experience of breaking bread is really important. And I even use it in my organizing. When I'm having public meetings or I'm facilitating public meetings, I always feed people. If it's not in the budget, then we figure out a way to pool our resources and get food to have for people. And that came to me, not from what my mother taught me, but I used to be on my local planning board in New York. And oh my God, our meetings were just horrific, right? Because we were dealing with land use issues. And the land use issues were fundamentally foundational about racism. Who gets the good stuff and who gets the bad stuff, right? And people didn't really have a way to process that, but they knew that they were being treated badly. So they would come to our planning board meetings and they would act a fool, throwing chairs, really acting a fool. And I was on that board for 10 years. And one day, our staff director, our administrative director, ordered deli food for the board members right before the meeting started. So if we got there half an hour early, we could have a little something to eat before the meeting started. The meeting was during dinner time. And the whole meeting transformed because we were hungry, right? And I teach this. When I teach planning classes, I teach this. Hangry is a real thing. It's a real thing, right? Feed the people. Feed the people. So that's just one thing. But I also think being as honest as you can be with folk, if I can project the energy that I project, and sometimes that energy can be really intense, then I have to be able to receive it, right? And create the space for people to say to me what they need to say to me. And I really work hard at that, Destiny, just making that space possible. Now, if you step to me with some crazy stuff, then we're going to have to resolve that. But even if you do, it doesn't mean that we can't ever have a relationship, right? But we can't have a relationship as long as the crazy stuff remains on the table in between us. We can't get to the place that we need to get to. And I just believe that in this moment, we don't have time for all this personal, interpersonal foolishness. We just do not. People are coming for us. They're coming for you. They're coming for me. They're coming for our communities. There's a report that was released yesterday. Mustafa Ali sent it to me and a bunch of people. 300,000 black women have lost their jobs in the past 90 days. They are not finished, right? They are coming for us as sure as we are standing here breathing this air right now. It is a targeted attempt to come at us. Last thing I'll say about that, about the coming at us part. So, when they started talking about trying to reform birthright citizenship, folks think that they're talking about immigrants, right? They're not talking about immigrants, they're talking about us. Birthright citizenship is the core principle of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which established citizenship for the formerly enslaved. Everybody else is an afterthought. The 14th Amendment and birthright citizenship is about us. I'm very clear in what moment I'm in. So, if I understand the threat, if I understand the political moment, if I understand the intensity at which these threats are being executed against us, we don't have no time for foolishness. We don't. Okay, you want to be mad at me? Fine. But let's put that on the back burner for the moment, and let's get together and figure out what we can do together to push back against the insanity, but also to protect our people, our families, our communities, our institutions, right? And on your point about people losing their resources, when we started this work, we didn't have a dime. We had a total of $8,500 in income for the first 8 years of our existence. And the only way that we were able to ever actually hire paid staff is when we sued the city of New York for operating that sewage treatment plant as a public nuisance to us. And we won that lawsuit. And they had to pay us $1.1 million. That's the first time we were able to hire staff. But before that, I had a full-time job, Peggy had a full-time job, Chuck had a full-time job. I used to work for an organization called the Center for Constitutional Rights in New York. They made every flyer for every event we ever did. Did they know they made every flyer? I'm not sure. This was in the 80s. But they did, right? And we cobbled together our own internal resources to do the work that we needed to do. We have gotten a little high and mighty. We were pulling down millions of dollars, right? And we might have thought that that was the point of validation. It is not. The validation comes from building organizations that can withstand the test of time, that can withstand everything that they're bringing, and they are bringing a lot. Don't get me wrong, they are coming with some wild stuff that ain't none of us actually ever experienced before, but it's not enough to undermine us if we don't let it. And so the interpersonal thing is really important in this moment, because a lot of people got a lot of beef, right? I don't like them because they did this. I'll tell you one beef I had years ago, and I do mean decades. We were on our way to a Northeast Environmental Justice Network meeting, and this young brother said to me, who was from New York, you know, y'all have been taking up too much space, talking to me and Peggy. Y'all need to step to the side. We were on the Amtrak. And I turned around and I said, I will push you in front of this train before I will get out of the way, right? I said, but I also know it would never occur to you to say that to Bob Bullock or to Ben Chavis or to any of the men who are in this space. I'll get up when I don't have any breath left in my body. That's when I get up. But what I will do is build a table that is so big that will have a seat for everybody who wants to get there. That's my mission. I built the rooms that y'all are in. I built the tables that y'all sit at, right? I opened the doors that y'all come through. I supported the institutions at the Ford Foundation that you work at. I did all of that because I can't do it by myself. I'm building a movement. Movement building is not individual reputation building. Movement building is something different. And we got to be clear, are we building a movement or are we building a career trajectory? I'm building a movement. Destiny, I'm so glad to see you, girl.
Hi. Before.
I see you now.
All right, bet.